So I have a PhD in international race relations. I studied African studies. I studied the Atlantic slave trade. I know that 10 million people came to the United States. Africans came to the United States as slaves and worked as slaves in the United States. Another 10 million died in the trade across the Atlantic and being captured. 8 million were enslaved in Africa. 6 million were enslaved in Asia over a 200-year period of time. So over that 200-year period of time when slavery, as most people know it, existed, there were 24 million people enslaved. Today, there are between 28 and 30 million people who are human slaves across the globe. Is it a problem that exists in other places? Some of you may have read that in Daytona Beach about a week ago and during Bike Week, 22 men were arrested because they were trying to have sex with girls under the age of 16, specifically girls under the age of 16. In Seminole County, where I live, just outside of Orlando, 32 men were arrested last summer because they were brought by a tour guide, literally somebody who earns money by bringing men to a particular locale. Orlando is one of the sex tourism capitals of the United States. They were brought there specifically to have sex with girls under the age of 16 during that week. I want to paint a picture for you what it means to be a girl brought into the sex trade. Average age is 12 across the globe. It's not much different in the United States. They're going to have sex 5 times a day, 365 days a year. So if they became liberated by the time they were 16, which is very unlikely, but if they were, they would have been raped 7,000 times. Now, we were talking about sexual assault this morning. We had a panel discussion in one of the breakout sessions talking about it. Most of us know somebody who has been sexually assaulted, and we know that's something that stays with them for the rest of their lives. It's almost impossible to shake. Imagine being 16 years old and having been raped 7,000 times. It's why I've spent the last year, and will probably spend the last years of my career working on the issue of human trafficking with my daughter, shoulder to shoulder. I listen to older people. I'm not an angry person. One of the few times in my life that I was angry was the week after Hurricane Katrina, watching the 100,000, mostly African Americans, mostly poor people in the convention center and Superdome in New Orleans, stranded, no food, no water, incredible conditions, until CNN finally put split-screen images on television that Friday night, and we suddenly saw what FEMA was saying was going on and what was actually going on. And the trucks and buses and other vehicles started coming in the next day. I was lucky enough to go with the Orlando Magic 7 days after the storm to Baton Rouge, where the first evacuees were going. And we spent 2 days in one of the churches that you saw on television all the time. And I went there, I said, with anger in my heart, but that dissipated as I talked to people in the shelter. But as I was about to leave, I was talking to Alex Martins, the president of the Magic and the pastor of this church. Couldn't help but see an older woman on a wall not too far from us who had a long line of people who wanted to speak to her. And on each side of her were 3 cots or beds, and it looked like 5 nuclear African-American families. I asked the pastor of the church who she was. He said her name is Ida Johnson, that she was 106 years old, and that was 5 generations of her family on either side. Now, I know, and everybody knows, this is almost a week after the storm now, that every single house in the lower 9th Ward, where most of the African-American population lived and all of her family did, was gone. Totally Some structures still stood, but you couldn't live in them. So I went up to Ms. Johnson, and to this day I don't have any idea what I said to Ms. Johnson, but I will never forget what Ms. Johnson said to me. God is good. Everything is gone in her life. God is good. I stepped back and I talked to her daughter, who was 87, and she said to me that this was the day her mother got faith that everything would be okay because the Orlando Magic were there. It wasn't that she was a Magic fan or even a basketball fan, but it represented that people were going to come to New Orleans and help them rebuild their homes. It's been the largest volunteer effort in the history of this country. Our DeVos students up there since 2006 have spent with me and my wife 42 weeks in the lower 9th Ward helping to rebuild. It's been the most transformative thing of my own lifetime. I listened to people at Leadership Florida when I spoke to them. After my speech was over, I went out in the corridor. Another speaker had already started, and several people came out there to talk to me. One guy came out, and I could see he wanted to be the last one there. He waited till everybody else left. He had tears in his eyes. And he said, I work at the University of Central Florida. I'm not sure if that was in the introduction. And he said, I was at the University of Central Florida in 1994. He said, I'm gay, I was being bullied, I was contemplating committing suicide, I was about to leave the university, and somehow President John Hitt, who had been there 2 years, found out what was going on, and John Hitt in 1994 stood up for the rights of gay and lesbian students at UCF. If we listen to people, we will begin to understand what's going on. This day, as we sit here, and I'm going to be here for 15 minutes. During this period of time, this would have happened in a typical 15-minute period in our country. 35 children will have dropped out of school. 11 high school students would be victimized by violence on high school property. A child under the age of 16 was likely killed by a handgun. 900 children were abused. 129 women or girls were battered. 26 were raped. 29 were enslaved in the 15 minutes that I'm going to be before you this afternoon. If you listen to people with diverse backgrounds, you'll be more able to make good decisions and do the right thing. I don't have the slightest doubt that if there are more women as leaders in our country, in government and in our state agencies, that all those issues I just mentioned wouldn't have numbers that high, because women would prioritize them to address and have as our solutions. I believe that we have to help our young people believe in what they can't see. We have to build a floor on the despair that so many of them live in, a roof over their heads, so that they can dream the dreams, that they can be empowered to become whatever they hope they want to be. I am from the world of sports. In the world of sports, we talk about the miracle of sports taking place in the huddle. It's something that I hope we can spread throughout our communities and institutions of higher education and corporate America, because in that huddle, I can't think of any other place where it suddenly doesn't matter if you're African American or white or Latino or Asian American, Native American, Arab American, doesn't matter if you're Protestant, Catholic, Buddhist, Sikh, Jew, Hindu or Muslim, young or old, gay or straight, come from a rich family or a poor family. You can't win if you don't pull together. When I was beginning to get involved in the civil rights movement in the late 1960s, I went through an exercise with a leader who said, please take 10 minutes, there was a group of us there, please take 10 minutes and come up with what you'd like to be written on your tombstone. I think she thought that people would come up with clever things, but I took it seriously. And I said to her, when it became my term, that what I would like to have written is he didn't have to be Jewish to want to fight against anti-Semitism. He didn't want to have to be a woman to fight against sexism. He didn't have to be a person of color to want to fight against racism. He didn't have to be gay or lesbian to fight against homophobia. He didn't have to be poor to fight against poverty. I live my life, or I try to understand that we are all part of that same human fabric of our society. He for she. He for she is an imperative movement, but we need to go beyond the he for she and fight for anybody who is not in a position where they can gain equality on their own. If we have learned to embrace diversity and inclusion, then if our children have learned how to hate, we can teach them how to love again. If they're waging war on one another and violence in their schools, we can give them the tools to make peace. He for she, I'm in 100%. I am a feminist and very proud to be. Thank you very much.